talking about the research that I've been doing my entire time at University of Puget Sound PT School, and hopefully I'll give you a few tips that can be helpful in increasing motivation for physical activity amongst your patients. So I took this research to the booths at CSM this year in Houston with my colleagues, and we had a ton of fun sharing our findings with the PT community. And here is the official title of our paper, which is still under peer review to be published. That's Motivation and Fulfillment of Basic Psychological Needs Among Physically Active Adults. This is the most current version of sort of 5 previous iterations of this project that we like to call the Movement Stories Project. Yeah, purpose of our study is that we're aware of the negative impacts of physical inactivity and sedentary behavior on our minds and our bodies. And we're also seeing that the current trends for these behaviors go unchanged by promotional campaigns such as those put on by the CDC and the World Health Organization. And despite all the extensive research out there on demonstrating the role of physical activity in enhancing our well-being, our happiness, our longevity, the needle, so to speak, on the gauge for activity levels in our country remains stuck at a concerningly low level. So instead of continuing to warn people about the negative impacts of physical inactivity, the objective of our study was to sort of flip the script and ask, what is it that those people who are highly active are doing right? What motivates them? And can examining the lived experience of those highly active individuals help us start to develop some strategies to nudge that needle for nationwide fitness in the right direction? As PTs, I think we can all agree it's kind of right in our wheelhouse, and we sort of have a responsibility to not only treat the chief complaint that our patient comes in with, but hopefully go another step further and impact this person in a way that might set them up for sustainable, healthy habits well beyond graduation of a plan of care. So each past iteration of the Movement Stories project has looked at a different subset of participants across the adult lifespan, but they're all deemed highly active by our inclusion criteria. It's worth noting that recruitment for the study was mostly done around the UPS campus in the Tacoma area at large, so it does impact our demographics, but the hope of combining these 5 sort of smaller sample sizes is that it eventually adds together in a study that has more power and generalizability to a wider audience. Okay, so we used a mixed methods approach for this study, combining qualitative and quantitative data. And we like this approach because although we appreciate the value of our validated studies and surveys that we used, we find that nuanced discussion gives important data about the participants' lived experience that we're getting into. The greater body of literature kind of shows that discussions which elicit a personal narrative help participants make sense of their experience, adds a chance for them to formulate identities around it, and kind of filter in their personal values. So we chose self-determination theory as the philosophical framework for our study because of its robust and well-studied body of applications for examining motivational determinants that have to do with behavioral change. And this applies to sort of health behavior as well. Quick notes about self-determination theory is that it defines 3 basic psychological needs, or BPNs, which are autonomy, the feeling of being in control of your actions; competence, a feeling of skill or being good at whatever you're doing; and then relatedness, which is that personal human connection. Another piece of self-determination theory is types of motivation, which range on a spectrum from intrinsic to extrinsic. Some of the questions on our surveys that I mentioned help us see where our participants fall along this spectrum. And this is important because intrinsic types of motivation are shown to be more predictive of long-term exercise adherence. So here's also a little bit of context into the qualitative data. I talked about surveys a little bit. This is more on the interview side of things, where we took statements that we talked about in one-on-one conversations with our participants, and we pull out coded statements that apply to sort of the motivational constructs that mirror our questions on our questionnaires about what types of things are motivating these people to stay consistent with their physical activity. And any statement that aligns with one of those constructs was pulled out, quantified, and sort of how these arrows show with the corresponding colors were sort of added up and given a data point. Doing this allowed us to see what our participants decided to focus on in their surveys and their interviews and kind of compare and contrast. So getting into the results of our study, let's talk about what we found. We found that our participants in all of our cohorts showed higher levels of met basic psychological needs and satisfaction, as well as lower levels of frustration compared to USA averages. And looking at this, it may be reasonable to target for fulfilling the 3 basic psychological needs as a strategy for increasing physical activity levels. This also aligns with previous research on this topic, particularly some research done by Lee and colleagues, illustrating the concept that although it seems satisfaction and frustration are two distinct or are two things on opposite sides of a spectrum, we're actually seeing that they're sort of rather distinct, and you can have high levels of satisfaction and high levels of frustration. It just depends on the certain stressors in your life. But the cool part is that higher levels of satisfaction are shown to have a protective effect against higher levels of frustration. So to give sort of an example, some of the most interesting interview results that we got had to do with this idea of satisfaction levels and frustration levels coexisting. Let's take our college students and our mothers that we put through this study. They both expressed high levels of frustration, citing sources like hostile coaching environments, social media influence, and the stressors of childcare as sources of extra frustration. But despite these sources, our participants still reaped the benefits of high levels of satisfaction that they're getting from their physical activity behaviors. So let's say this is our patient in the clinic. We can't necessarily tell them being physically active will eliminate all their sources of stress in their life, but we can give them an option to increase feelings of satisfaction in their life through regular physical activity. And then our next slide compares the survey versus interview prevalence of the motivational constructs reported as sources of inspiration for physical activity. For example, on the survey results on the left, I know it's a lot of colors, a lot of numbers, kind of weird to read, but I'll tell you what's going on. The surveys reported like just general fitness as the highest motivator for exercise, whereas when we compare that to what people were reporting in interview, they rated competence, feeling of skill in whatever they're doing, as the number one motivator for them. This may be due to the nature of semi-structured interview, but our data collection techniques did account for like follow-on questions. So we'd like to theorize that this discrepancy is more likely due to the difference between what participants reported on the survey and what they decided to focus on or give value to when expressing themselves to another person. This kind of highlights the importance of taking an individualized approach and developing an understanding about an individual in a holistic way, rather than just looking at numbers on an outcome measure. So big conclusions here for our study was that lack of physical activity is a nationwide issue, and the pendulum has not swung yet. But there are multiple factors that fuel motivation for healthy behaviors, in which an individualized approach is needed to promote increases in physical activity in our community. Clinicians will likely benefit from addressing fulfillment of our 3 basic psychological needs if we're trying to inspire more physical activity and to essentially kind of bulletproof our patients from the chaos of life, as it were. So what can we do as outpatient PTs? Cool part about this is that any PT worth their stuff, and I know all of you guys in here are likely already doing this sort of thing. So we talk about self-determination theory, we talk about motivational interviewing. It takes kind of a high level of social skill and bandwidth to be a PT out there practicing and offering skilled care. So if you're not thinking about this already, you're probably doing it without even realizing. But I'll give you a couple tips here that are supported in the literature that we've researched on this topic. So one is leveraging self-determination theory. If you've got a patient in front of you who's struggling to keep consistent outside of the clinic, helping them through satisfying these 3 basic psychological needs can be a strategy for us. So help patients feel a sense of control and ownership over the rehab process, incorporate collaborative goal setting, provide lots of choice and opportunities for self-reflection. Supporting autonomy is a great strategy for this. And we can also take a look at techniques to cultivate competence. So this can look like making resources available to that patient, tailor building our treatment plans to set them up for a win during the appointment and say, look at that, look how good you're doing, let's add to that. Building in success is important. And then beyond just the relatedness that they're getting from that physical therapist-patient relationship, if that patient is appropriate for like group exercise settings, helping them get connected to a community where they can feel like they're coming up with someone alongside them can be a great way to tackle that feeling of relatedness. Let's also talk about some basic components of motivational interviewing that can be helpful as well. So classic techniques here are open-ended questions. We are letting the patient take ownership over being the expert of their personal experience. We are the clinical expert, and we come together to make that therapeutic alliance and help them grow and recover in the best way possible. Using affirmations is another key to success, where you're making sure to celebrate successes when they come along, but also that comes along with developing discrepancy. So if they've expressed a goal to you and they're not quite presenting a healthy behavioral loop towards that goal, you can kind of call them out in a constructive way and say, you've told me that this is your goal. The behavior that you're displaying is not necessarily aligning with that. How can I help you to adjust that and move forward? And then motivational interviewing also mentions the technique of reflecting. This is less about like self-reflection and more just that classic form of repeating back to someone a summarized version of what they're saying to you so that you're making sure they feel understood and we're all on the same page moving forward. Some clinical pearls here, the do's and don'ts of motivational interviewing. Definitely do develop that discrepancy that I mentioned, but try not to use scare tactics, saying, if you don't do this, you will wither and die. It's nothing like that. It's more saying, let's talk about the inconsistency here and how can we address that in a healthy way. Definitely roll with resistance rather than trying to jump to an instant fix. You may know the clinically right answer, the best supported intervention from the evidence, but waiting, making sure that your patient is ready to receive that knowledge, helping them feel heard and like their experience is being taken seriously before we jump to the fix is kind of indicated here. So focusing on the why before we rush to the how, and always supporting their self-efficacy, making sure that they have a sense of evocation and autonomy in the rehab process. We're their cheerleader and they're doing all the hard work. So those are some basic things there. I just want to say thank you again for giving me this space to talk about something that got me excited to be a PT in the first place and keeps me excited to be in this career for a long time to come. I learned a lot of this stuff by just watching you in this clinic and realizing what a good PT can look like. So hopefully some reframing of motivational interviewing and self-determination theory can be helpful for you out there. Let me know if you have any questions.